Hello and welcome to PowerSpeaking Live. Thank you so much for joining us today for what is sure to be a very rich and rewarding conversation. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, your host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking Incorporated. Following today's session, you can find this episode and all past ones on the PowerSpeaking podcast, and we'll drop a link in chat for easy access. There's a few questions I'd like you to consider to kick off this session. Has there ever been a time in which you have regretted how you responded to a challenging question in a meeting, or passed up an opportunity to cogently express your point of view? Like me, do you incessantly dwell on those missed opportunities and wish that you could rewind the tape and get a do-over? The reality is these moments are fleeting and they happen all the time. The good news is there are steps that you can proactively take to improve your ability to show up and communicate effectively when put on the spot. What we're talking about is the art of spontaneous communication. And I am delighted to share that we have a special guest with us today who's an expert on this subject. Welcome, Matt Abrams. Matt is a leading expert in communication with decades of experience as an author, an educator, a podcaster, and a coach. Matt is the host of the wildly popular podcast, Think Smart, Talk Fast, and recently released his latest book, which you see right behind him and I have right here, Think Faster, Talk Smarter. Matt, you may recall it was actually this book that first connected us. I was instantly drawn to the topic because I think in so many ways, spontaneous communication is more complex and nuanced than formal presentations and certainly has a much, much broader application.
Carrie, it is a true pleasure to be here with you, and I absolutely agree. If we all think about it for a moment, most of our communication happens in the moment. It's not the plan presenting, the pitches, the meetings with agendas. It's what happens when somebody asks a question or asks for feedback, or we make a mistake and we have to correct it, or we're making small talk. So much of our communication falls into this spontaneous category, and yet most of us never think about, let alone learn how to do it better.
Yeah, and your book provides just all kinds of very prescriptive advice and exercises that you can do. So we're going to dig into that. I'm curious, though, what was going through your mind with the questions I posed at the outset. Has there ever been a time in which you've botched a moment to speak effectively when put on the spot?
Oh, absolutely. It happens routinely, where I'll misspeak or I'll have technology that fails when I was hoping that it would work. Yeah, it happens all the time to me, as it does to most people. The question becomes, how do you handle it? And I think having the right mindset and approach can make a fundamental difference in terms of our level of anxiety and our ability to keep control and credibility in those moments.
Absolutely. And I want to stress for our audience that on the subject of spontaneous communication, we invite you to join the conversation. So at any time. If you have a question or your own advice or experiences that you'd like to share, please put them in chat. We've got an exceptional producer at the ready who will be monitoring. So Matt, I'd like to start with the why. In your view, why do you think that it's so important that we cultivate the craft of communicating spontaneously? And I want to reference something in your book that really struck me. You said that becoming adept at spontaneous communication takes patience, commitment, and grace. But as the people you coach and teach have found, the impact can be life-changing. Can you say more? And do you have like a specific success story you could share?
Sure. So for many of us, speaking in the moment is very challenging. It's full of anxiety and concern. And many of us just feel like we're not born with the gift of gab. That's not me. And there are times when we are called upon or we want to become that person. And then the good news is, as your organization knows, people can learn to hone and develop their skills. And this is no different. There is a story I tell in the book. This woman named Irma. Irma was a grandmother. When she came to work with me, she was in her 70s. Irma, very early in her life, when she was a young girl in high school, stood up in some class, I can't remember, and had to say something, recite a speech or something. And the high school teacher she had at that moment told her that it was the absolute worst he had ever heard. And that was devastating to her. It hurt her in many, many ways, so much so that she chose a career that made sure she would never or very infrequently have to speak in front of others. She became a research librarian. And she sought out coaching from me because she knew her granddaughter was getting married, and she wanted to be able to, if called upon, to give a toast or say something kind about her granddaughter, whom she loved very much. And so we worked together on some of the very skills that are in the book, and I'm quite pleased to say that Irma delivered an amazing spontaneous toast and actually spoke in several other situations at the event. She was very proud of herself. She was very proud of her granddaughter, but it took work. You know, the only way to get better at communication, planned or spontaneous, is three things: repetition, reflection, and feedback. You have to practice. You have to think what's working, what's not, and you have to get feedback. And Irma, among many, many others I've coached, have become more confident and comfortable speaking in the moment. And everybody listening and everybody can do the same thing. But it's not a light switch. It takes practice. It takes work. Luckily, little steps can lead to a big difference. And that's what the book and methodology are all about.
That's a terrific story. And so much there. I mean, it talks about how learning how to do this more effectively and really committing to that practice, reflection, and taking in that feedback can be so freeing and, you know, unleash potential and opportunity in so many different ways. And the fact that she chose to commit to improving at the age of 70 is also really inspiring. It's never, ever, ever too late to commit some time, and the rewards are immense. So I'd like to talk about a theme throughout your book, which is this concept of thinking faster. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that? And how do you hone or develop that skill?
So thinking faster, some people say thinking faster is not my problem. I think fast enough. The problem is, how do I slow the thoughts down? Think faster really refers to pattern recognition. When we are put in the moment and need to respond, what can really help us is to be meta-aware of what's needed in the moment. I like to use the analogy to athletics all the time when I teach this material. Many of us have played a sport, been coached to play the sport better. The drills you do, the activities you do to prepare yourself for the spontaneous sport you play are exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to think faster. You know, Steph Curry dribbling down the court is seeing things because of his practice. Clearly he's very talented, but because of his practice and honing of those skills, he sees things that, you know, I as a Sunday basketballer don't see by any means. The point is, training yourself by doing activities, focused activities, helps you to recognize patterns more specifically, more quickly, so you can respond. When you pair that with an open approach to those situations, so mindset really matters, and some tools about how to respond in those situations, all of a sudden you're not just thinking faster, you're able to talk smarter. So the book has a methodology. I've taught it for decades now, and it's all about first managing your mindset and then managing your messaging. And so learning these skills, when all put together, allow you to have that agility to respond when needed.
Great. It's interesting because, and I know, again, we're talking about more spontaneous communication than formal presentations. It does make me think of the fact, though, that one of the keys to being a truly extemporaneous speaker when you're delivering more of a formal presentation, ironically, is that practice. And
Yes.
to ensure that you really, really have your message and your narrative down pat so that you can truly be in the moment and be
Yes.
meta aware of everything that's going on.
It is a big irony that you've nailed it right on the head, which is that to get better at spontaneous speaking, you have to prepare. But it's the type of preparation that an athlete does. If anybody knows anything about jazz music, jazz musicians don't just play random notes. They actually play chord progressions that they've learned through practice. So there's this notion of preparing yourself so in the moment you can respond well.
Which is so much more gratifying for your audience and for you as the individual, right? Because you can respond to what you're getting from your audience and make it a true connection. Because I think that's the other key, Matt, is if you are not capable of taking in all those cues, you're really just speaking at the individuals and not really striving to make a genuine connection, which is what communication is all about.
I 100% agree with you. The word communication simply means to make common. And the way we make common is to connect with other people. And to connect, you need to be present and you need to be focused. And the type of work we're talking about doing for spontaneous speaking really allows for that connection to happen. You know, we've all seen the elementary school kid who memorizes their presentation and recites it, and they get through it from beginning to end, but there's no recognition of what's going on, connection, adapting. And communication is all about adapting and adjusting as you go. So having these skills and having the confidence to deploy these skills allows you to truly connect.
And get a little comfortable with messy. I love one of the things you talk about is this isn't about perfection.
Oh, absolutely not. One of the barriers to effective communication in any capacity, planned or spontaneous, is the desire to do it right. We want to do it right. Now, you and I have been doing this work for a long, long time, and I don't know if you agree with me, but I certainly believe there is no right way to communicate. There are better ways and worse ways, but there is no one right way. And striving for that right way puts tremendous amount of pressure on us. In fact, it boils down to cognitive load. Your brain in many ways is like a computer. It's not a perfect analogy. But if I'm on my laptop with multiple windows open, or if I'm on my phone with multiple apps running, each one of those windows and apps is performing less well because the others are also open at the same time. And our brain works the same way. If I'm constantly judging and evaluating everything I'm saying, or worse yet, having memorized, trying to make sure I say everything right, I have less bandwidth to focus on actually saying anything. So I have the audacity in front of my Stanford MBA students to start my very first class on strategic communication every quarter with this notion of, I tell them, the goal is to maximize your mediocrity. And their jaws drop. But they learn to understand by the end of that first class what I mean is if you just strive to get it done so you can focus your entire bandwidth on doing it, you actually will do it better than if you're constantly judging and evaluating. So the bottom line is we need to, when we communicate, it's about connection, not perfection. And if we turn the volume down, I'm not saying don't judge and evaluate ever, you should, but if we turn that volume down, we can actually improve the quality of the communication.
Love that. I love it. Now, on the subject of kind of this meta awareness, you talk about 6 different steps to more effective spontaneous communication, one of which is listening, and really, really deep listening. And I love this notion you discuss where you really, to truly be an effective listener, you really are listening for 2 signals on 2 different antennas. Can you say more about that?
Yes. So this notion comes from the work of Carol Robbins and David Bradford. They are legendary faculty members at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. The most well-known course at Stanford GSB is a course called Touchy-Feely Interpersonal Relationships and Communication, and they are architects of that. And they talk about listening as being critical, not just listening to others, but listening to yourself. And they have this notion of two antennae. One is external focused and one is internal focused. So whenever we are communicating, we have to focus on the bottom line of what's being said, not the top line. Most of us only listen to the top line and then start rehearsing and judging. We listen to the bottom line, what's really being said, and then we listen internally to how am I reacting to it? What does my intuition say? What does my past experience say? So you're listening for two frequencies, if you will, simultaneously. And in so doing, you are able to respond better. Let me give you an example. Let's say, Carrie, you and I come out of a meeting and you say, Matt, how do you think that went? Well, if I'm just listening externally, I might hear, oh, she wants feedback. And I start itemizing or could potentially itemize all the wrong things that happened and how we could do better. But my internal antenna is saying, it's interesting that Carrie said that in a tone she usually doesn't. It was much quieter. She came out the back door, not the front door. She paused a little bit more before she asked. My internal intuition is telling me you really don't want feedback. You really want support in that moment. And if I give you harsh constructive feedback, I might be working against what's needed. So listening to both antennas and trying to understand what's really needed in the moment is really useful. Many of us just listen enough to get a hunch of what somebody is saying, and then we respond. So deep, focused listening, the bottom line, not the top line. What's your intuition saying are critical to being able to respond appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how would you effectively respond in that moment?
So what I would do is ask a question. I would say, would you like some specific feedback about things I think that could improve, or do you just want me to listen to how you're feeling in the moment? So I would ask a question to better confirm the conflicting messages that I'm getting from you and from myself.
Yeah.
Inquiry is the way to get through that.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Because what was going through my mind is my internal antenna would instantly be thinking, well, clearly she didn't think it went well because she's asking me for this feedback immediately as opposed to leading with like a supportive comment. And jumping to that conclusion could not yield the result that you want at all. So we do what we call getting to the question behind the question. Why is it that you're asking that? Exactly what?
Anyway, what can I do to help you in this situation? That's right. It demonstrates empathy and concern and allows the other person to guide the interaction.
Perfect. I love it. I love it. I see we have some comments coming through here from Mary McGlynn. As an international organization, we are aware of vast cultural differences in how we approach communication. Do you see cultural differences in how you approach think faster, talk smarter?
So culture and context loom large in all communication. And when I say culture, I don't mean just country of origin, which is important, but cultures exist and vary within organizations. Within my own family, my two teenage kids have a very different culture around communication than I do. Different departments have different communication patterns, different companies do. So yes, culture looms large. And part of what we need to do is understand the expectations, norms, and rules of the communication that we're having. And if we don't, if we don't understand them, we have to listen and ask and learn. But certainly some cultures put a priority on perhaps more thoughtfulness or understanding the context more, the impact of the context, or using the context to communicate. So we do need to be mindful of it. But fundamentally, and I have taught this methodology in many, many locations, countries, companies, the overarching methodology of let's get our approach focused appropriately and let's use specific message structures to focus our communication applies throughout. But in any communication, the context and culture influences not only what you can, should, and will say, but also how people perceive it.
Yeah, Absolutely. And Matt, what you're really speaking to is a fundamental principle to effective communication, whether it's spontaneous or formal, and that is being audience centric to first and foremost. Really take the time to understand your audience, which can include cultural norms and expectations that influence the way in which you're going to engage and interact.
Right. Right. And the way we do that differs depending on if it's planned or spontaneous. If it's planned, you can query people, you can search them out online, you can ask others. In the moment, it's a little harder, but if you know you're going into a situation where you might have to speak spontaneously, you can do some pre-work, but you can also ask and observe. And you can adjust and adapt based on the responses that you get. One of the most useful tools if you're speaking in front of a relatively large group is simply taking polls. Or if you're virtual, you can use the reactions to just get a sense of where people are. How many of you have heard of this? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. And if I don't see a lot of thumbs up, then I take a different path. So it is the ability to assess the audience in the moment, that pattern recognition we talked about, that enables you to then respond more appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Great. Agility is another theme I'm hearing.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Ability to be really agile. And naturally, the more practice and experience you gain, the easier it is to be agile, as well as embracing that mindset of mediocrity. It enables you to get out of your comfort zone a little bit and be willing to adapt and flex.
That's why. And that's why I'm such a big fan of improvisation. Many people think of improv as comedy and funny, but improv is simply teaching you how to be present and how to respond. And I always encourage people who are interested in spontaneous speaking to at least think about and learn about improv. Another big unlock that helps with this agility is reframing these spontaneous speaking situations as opportunities and not threats. Many of us, if you're told, hey, I need you to give this presentation, or at the end of the meeting, people are going to ask you questions, we don't say, oh, great, I can't wait for questions. Many of us say, oh my goodness, I'm going to be threatened and challenged. I'm going to have to defend my position. Yet if we see these as opportunities to extend, to expand, to connect, then it becomes a little less daunting and easier. You know, if I'm asked going into a meeting, my boss turns to me and says, hey, would you mind introducing this other person since you've worked with them before? Instead of saying, oh, goodness, I have to do this right so I don't embarrass myself or embarrass the other person, I could say it'll be really useful for the team to know this person and to get to the value this person has to bring. So seeing that very same situation as an opportunity versus a threat helps me feel more comfortable, allows me to be more present, and I can do a better job. So that's a big unlock in terms of how we frame the situations, and it lets us be more agile.
Absolutely. That brings up a concept, and I can't remember who this came from, but it was in a Harvard Business Review article I read about one of the keys to taming anxiety around speaking is a spirit of generosity. If you focus more on the service that you're aiming to provide. So in your example, this wonderful opportunity to introduce a colleague that you really respect and admire, it shifts that to the service and away from yourself and this feeling of feeling that you have to be perfect.
Right, exactly. No, reframing of these situations is very, very powerful. It helps with anxiety, it helps with excitement, and it helps with focus. So generosity, seeing it as exciting, seeing it as an opportunity, all of those are very positive approaches to these spontaneous moments.
I see Nora has a question. I'm an individual that needs to process information before I feel confident in providing feedback or responses/reactions. Any advice for individuals like this? Thank you, Nora. I'm sure many can relate to that.
Yes. And Nora, you're bringing up a big concern that many people have. We feel pressure to respond immediately in spontaneous speaking situations. So when somebody asks a question, I feel like I have to answer right away. Or when somebody asks for feedback, I have to give it immediately. You actually don't. You can actually take a moment. You can literally say, give me a moment to think about that. There's some research that says that when you take the pause, you actually benefit your credibility because you're showing that you're really trying to give an appropriate answer. Now, I'm not sure I would recommend doing that with every single thing you say, but you could say, give me a moment to think about that. Or you could ask a clarifying question. So if somebody asks you something or requests feedback, a clarifying question buys you a little bit of time to collect your thoughts. I'm a huge fan of paraphrasing. I think paraphrasing is a multifaceted tool every communicator should get familiar with using. I can paraphrase your question. What we know about paraphrasing is it's what's called a lower order cognitive skill. In other words, you can do it while thinking about other stuff. So I can paraphrase what you say, buys me time, makes you feel good because I've just demonstrated I heard you. Or if I misheard you, you can correct me again, showing you that I really want to get what you're saying. So one, we have to realize we don't have to respond right away. And two, there are at least 3 tools we can use to buy ourselves time. Ask for it, ask questions, or paraphrase.
Excellent. Hopefully that helps, Nora. I want to talk about another of the 6 steps, and this is the power of structures. We refer to them as frameworks, and they just have immense value. I think having a number in your arsenal that you can quickly call upon in the moment is invaluable. It helps you to structure your thoughts in a way that's compelling and clear to follow. It's very helpful to the audience, making it easier to follow and also remember. You talk about many in your book. Share with us one of your favorites, why, and if you could give an example of it in use.
Excellent. So thank you. The structure is an incredible tool to help with all communication. Our brains are not wired for itemized lists of information. And many of us, when we communicate, especially when put on the spot, we just take our audience on a journey of our discovery of what we're trying to say as we're saying it. We just list information. That's not helpful. In fact, Carrie, I don't know about you, but when I go to the grocery store, if I have to buy more than 3 items, I have to write it down. I can't remember lists. And that, unfortunately, people, when they speak in the moment, give a lot of lists and they miss the opportunity to help. Having a structure, a framework, whatever you wish to call it, helps package the information up in a meaningful way so that people can process it. It also helps us as the speakers to prioritize what we're saying. So structure is really key. And to me, a structure is nothing more than a logical connection of ideas. The one that most people are familiar with, it's not my favorite, so I'm going to sneak 2 in here, is problem, solution, benefit. If you've ever seen a television advertisement, you've seen this structure. The product or service is solving some kind of problem. They introduce the problem, they share how it's solved, and then the benefit you get from it. Now, my favorite structure in the whole world is 3 simple questions. What? So what? Now what? The what is the information you're getting across. The so what is why is it important and relevant to the person or people you're talking to. And the now what is what comes next. And you asked me to give an example. I'm going to give a few. Imagine I'm in one of those dreaded update meetings. I'm not a big fan of update meetings, but you're in a room where you have to give an update on a project you're working on. The what is your update? Here's what I've done or what I'm doing. The so what is here's why it's important to the project, to the team, to the company. And then the now what is here's what I'm going to do next, or here's what help I need to accomplish the next step. What, so what, now what? Giving feedback can use exactly the same structure. The what is my feedback? You spoke quickly without a lot of detail. The so what is when you speak quickly without a lot of detail, people might think you're not prepared or you're nervous. And then the now what is what I'd like you to do. Next time, slow down and add more information in this particular point. You can write emails in this structure. It's not just spoken. The subject line is the now what, the action you want, and then the body is the what and the so what. So what, so what, now what is a useful tool that I encourage everybody to use. My last example is I answered your question in what, so what, now what. I told you what the answer is, why it's important, and encouraged you to use it. So for me, that is an incredibly useful structure for people to benefit from and help package the information up for their audience.
Wonderful, wonderful. And thanks for providing a number of different examples. I also like, Matt, that you called out the fact that structures are equally valuable in written communication, especially emails, because they can force you to be really disciplined. It's easy to write a long email. What's more difficult is to really make it concise, pithy, and to the point, making it easier for your reader to digest and more likely that they'll take action.
That's right. By packaging things up, written or spoken, you make it easier for the person to recite it. And if you think about it, often our goal in communication is to empower our audience to take our message and cascade it. And if we package it up, written or spoken, we make that easier for them to do.
Absolutely. And in this world of information overload, where it's becoming more and more challenging to punch through the noise, even more important that you craft this technique. One of the frameworks I really love, I know it's mentioned in your book and it's been around forever and forever, probably for a reason, is PrEP, largely because it's really easy to remember. It's intuitive. And I think, like the example you gave, Matt, it has all kinds of application. You can use it to make a pitch. You can use it to present your point of view. You can even use it to respond to a question. So you lead with your position or your pitch, you give a quick reason, an example, and then you conclude with reiterating that, making it easier to remember. So all kinds of structures out there. Get familiar with them. Find a few, 3 that work best for you, and get some practice in using them. We have another question, Matt, that's come up. How do you think AI will change the way you teach spontaneous speaking skills?
Yeah, well, I think the jury's still out on that. Yeah, I tend to be an optimistic person in general, and I think AI can help us. I'll tell you how I'm encouraging my students to use it today. In many of our assignments, we do interactive work afterwards, where students have to answer questions, give each other feedback. So I say, go to generative AI, ChatGPT, Bard, whatever, Gemini, whatever there is, and type in the topic I'm presenting on this, and ask it to give you 3 or 4 questions relevant to that topic. And as the questions come, just practice answering them. It's a way to get those reps in to help you. So I think it's really useful to do that. Another way to use it, and I use this with many of my students who are non-native speakers, in this case in English, but it works in any language, where I have them talk through, because you can now talk to these tools. So talk through what you're planning to say, and then ask the tool to give you a couple examples of it being structured in different ways. So you, not to say that you memorize that structure, but you begin to see the different possibilities. It's like when you go clothes shopping, you try on different clothes to see what fits best, what looks best for you and feels most comfortable. You can use AI to give you those different examples so you can begin to see that in a way that's useful. So that's how I'm using it today. It will be very interesting to see how it morphs in the future. You know, the power of communication, and we talked about it earlier, Carrie, is this notion of connection. And AI is not a tool that helps you at that level. It can help you with the frameworks, it can help you with the content, but connecting is uniquely human. And so it'll be interesting to see how we can leverage AI to help us better connect.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I couldn't agree more vehemently. And I actually have a confession. I've been doing these live events for over 2 years now. And preparing for this session, for the very first time, Matt, I used ChatGPT to come up with suggested questions. Very first time. Normally, I come up with them on my own. And I have to tell you, it enhanced preparation so much. Yeah. One, because there were a lot of great questions. And of course, I had the benefit of your book being able to be drawn upon. Some of the questions were ones I wouldn't have even thought of, but more significantly, it allowed me to focus on the much more meaningful preparation, which was going back. I had read your book, but it had been several months. So I had more time to go back to look at particular topics, draw upon things. So it made the experience much more rewarding for me. So I think that's another great example of how it can be a wonderful support tool for some of the more, I don't want to say superficial work, but, not as complex, allowing you as the communicator to focus more on what it's going to take to make sure you have that real meaningful connection.
I love that you've used it as a tool for that. I'm going to take us on a slight tangent. On my podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart, actually this week, we released an episode where I interviewed two experts who are trying to figure out how to maximize the effectiveness of AI in terms of creative problem solving. And what they learned, which I find fascinating, the reason we had them on, because the podcast I do, like yours, is all about communication. And they found that having a conversation with AI gets you better, more creative results. Many of us use AI as a search engine. Just, give me questions on this or share with me the best restaurants in it, instead of actually engaging in dialogue, just like you would with a person, and you get more creative answers. So what I find fascinating is this tool that everybody is thinking is going to disrupt communication. The best way to interact with it is actually being a good communicator. So to me, it's really fascinating, and I look forward to seeing how this unfolds over time.
Yeah. Great example. And that's why there's so much focus now on effective prompts. And
yeah, absolutely.
Effective prompting is a back and forth to refine the results that you get back.
Yes.
Let's see. We just added your podcast in chat. Take advantage of that. If you haven't already tuned in, it's absolutely fantastic. Rachel says, speaking of connection, I love the creating common ground strategies in your book in different communication situations. Can you share an example?
Right. So this has, again, to do with how we reframe these as opportunities versus threat. And I rely a lot on work from improvisation in this particular part of the book. If anybody knows anything about improv, the most known lesson from improv is yes and, embracing opportunity, embracing commonality. When we are in circumstances where we have to speak spontaneously, there can often be differences of opinion, maybe even some contentious issues. And if we seek out areas of common ground, areas of connection, we can then bridge to a much more meaningful conversation. So let's take the most extreme circumstance. I give a presentation and it's Q&A time, and somebody comes in with a really hot and heavy, spicy question, right? It's very challenging and threatening. I could get defensive, I could get combative, but instead I could also look for areas of commonality. Even if I disagree 100% what the person is saying, the fact that we both are passionate about this topic is some common ground, and we can start from there. I can say, I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying, but I am really happy that you and I are both really see this as an important issue. And from there, you can open up dialogue. So by saying yes and, not necessarily to the question or the harsh feedback, but yes and to the caring about the issue, all of a sudden we can become more collaborative. And it changes the nature of the communication, my approach to the communication, and it makes it easier for me because I see I'm communicating with an ally versus somebody who is a foe. So this approach is really important, not just in a more formal situation where you're taking questions at the end of a presentation, but in all of our interactions. I use this all the time with my teenage kids when we have disagreement. I look for areas where we actually do have some common ground.
Wow, I really love that example because I have to confess, as you were talking, there were a few subjects that came to my mind that I feel so very, very strongly about, where it's hard for me to identify where I could find common ground. But to your point, just acknowledging that we're both very, very passionate on this subject, that in of itself is common ground. You may not agree, but it's much more likely to result in a more productive versus adversarial type conversation. And we certainly can use more common ground and more collaboration in
you bet. I have
climate.
Yeah, I have lots of friends. In fact, a former co-teacher of mine has gotten into this bridging work, political bridging, when trying to get people on different sides of the political spectrum to at least listen to each other. Doesn't mean you have to agree. And a lot of it is what we've just talked about, recognizing that you very passionately feel, as I do, about this topic. We just have different perspectives. And that's where the bridging starts, is that recognition.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. Can you talk a little bit about some of the common pitfalls you see people fall into as they're striving to improve their ability to speak spontaneously?
Sure. And there are many. I mean, the biggest is anxiety. People cave into their anxiety and don't open themselves up to the opportunity to get better at this. So the very first step in the methodology and the work that I've been doing for decades really does focus on how do we manage our anxiety. So that's the first pitfall, is people don't realize that they can actually work to feel more confident in any kind of communication situation. The other thing that people tend to do is they want, again, to do it right, and loosening the definition of right, just get it done. In improv, they have these wonderful sayings, and they have this saying, dare to be dull, just do what needs to be done. And that opens you up to a lot of possibility. And then the final big mistake people make is they don't structure the information. They simply ramble and rattle off all these things. So you have to deal with anxiety. You have to allow yourself permission just to do it and not worry about doing it right. And then use a structure to help yourself. Those are the three big areas where I see people stumble sometimes. I guess one other point is we often we often spend too much time ruminating. So when something doesn't go right, we just in that moment just get blocked and locked on what's going on. And there's a wonderful lesson that comes from the world of sport. Mike Krzyzewski, former basketball coach, he's now retired, Coach K he went by, taught all of his players this notion of next play. And next play is all about moving on. So if something doesn't go right in the moment, rather than ruminating and beating yourself up over it, move on to the next thing you have to say, to the next instance. If you're a basketball player and you miss a shot, if you sit there ruminating, even for a fraction of a second, you're one person down on the other end of the court defending against the team. So I'm not saying reflection is bad. Reflection is good, but reflection happens after the fact. So we have to give ourselves permission, if a mistake is made, to just keep going. It's normal. It's natural. We are not perfect. And in fact, by dwelling on it, we tend to make what comes next worse. So giving yourself permission to keep moving, next play, is really important as well. And I see a lot of people get locked up when they make a mistake, and you just keep going.
Yeah. I love that concept, next play. And you've acknowledged Steph Curry earlier. Steph is such a wonderful example of that. I mean, he can do a complete air ball, doesn't miss a beat. He's just on to the next play and may nail that next shot. It's really remarkable. And I have to confess, I'm a say the word? I'm not saying.
Ruminator.
I'm a dweller. I'm a dweller. So
many of us are. And there are times in our lives where rumination might be helpful, but it is not in the moment of spontaneity.
No.
If you have my father recently passed away, and ruminating on the many life experiences and learnings, I think, is appropriate. But if I'm in the midst of teaching or presenting, rumination is actually going to work against me. So I'm not saying never ruminate. I'm just saying in moments of spontaneous communication, next play, and then reflect later.
Exactly. 100%. And to your point, if you do dwell in the moment, it will inevitably make the situation even worse, because that negative talk is playing and you're undermining your confidence. The other thing that has helped me is just to remember, this is massive in my mind. Most people have moved on. They're not dwelling on it, right? That's right.
So in psychology, there's this notion of the spotlight effect. We feel like there's this bright spotlight on us all the time, and everything I do is being observed at a micro level. In fact, everybody feels like they have a spotlight on them, and they're not really paying attention to you and your spotlight. So yes, most people move on. Most people do not expect perfection. They just want to get information from you, and it doesn't have to be worded exactly right. And giving yourself that freedom really opens you up to connect and do it well.
I have to make a shout out, Matt, because you've talked about the value of improv and how that factors into cultivating this skill. And you recommended Improv Wisdom by
Brian Madsen.
Madsen, yeah. And we actually read her book. She joined our last PowerSpeaking Book Club session. Oh my gosh, what a gem. Thank you so much for making that connection.
Yes, Patricia is a friend, a mentor, and just a wonderful person. And when I am asked to tell people a book that fundamentally changed my life, it is her book, Improv Wisdom. it's not about how to be an improviser. It's about how to live your life following improv principles. And it's a wonderful book about how to be a better communicator because all of those principles help. So I'm really glad you got a chance to talk with her. She is fantastic. She's in her 80s and as spunky and sharp as ever.
Okay, there's people in my organization on this call who can attest to this. It just so happened that her age just organically came up near the very end of the conversation. Literally, you could see jaws drop.
Right, yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's sharper. She is sharper than I am, and she's got several decades on me. And I wonder, I often wonder if it's because of the improv practice, because you stay in the moment, you stay fresh, you stay, in a way that I think many of us as we age don't. And so
exactly, yeah, I
haven't run the experiment, but I think the N of one is that it's very helpful.
There you go. And I'm going to have our producer put a link to her book in chat. We highly, highly recommend checking that out. Audience, we've got 15 precious minutes remaining. So if you have any questions, please put them in chat. I have plenty more I'd like to ask. So I'd like to talk about the power of storytelling. We all know storytelling is immensely powerful, both in our personal lives and in business. What advice do you have for crafting a really compelling story in the moment?
Yeah, so several things have to come together in the moment to be compelling. So first, you have to really understand your audience. The stories you tell need to be relevant and important to the audience. So we have to think about what's critical and important to them. A good story is not just information, it's about emotion. So what are the emotions that I want to convey? And how best can I leverage those emotions? Is it through the examples I use, the analogies I give, the questions I ask? So we have to be thinking about the emotion. And then we have to think of our job as a communicator as really a storyteller tour guide. I'm taking you on a journey. And what does that journey look like in terms of getting people engaged? So if I just list and itemize information, that's not very engaging. But if I build up your curiosity, if I build some suspense, if I promise something and then deliver on it, that feels very rewarding. So thinking through who the audience is, the emotions I want to convey, making sure I have a clear structure, and then using engagement techniques as I go are useful. There are really three ways to engage audiences. Physical engagement, get them doing something. Mental engagement, get them singing something. Or linguistic engagement through the words you use, pulling them in. So those are the ingredients that go into good storytelling. The best way to become a good storyteller is just to observe lots of people telling stories and see what they do, not with the goal of stealing their process, but to just get a sense of what goes into good story, and then you find what works for you. I am fascinated by storytellers. In fact, on my podcast, we're going to do a special series coming up in the summer of non-conventional storytellers to see what they do. So I talked to a one-panel cartoonist. I talked to a magician. I talked to, believe it or not, a mime. And how do these people use storytelling? What can we learn from them? And a lot of it is about being audience-centric. It's about teasing or building curiosity. It's about where do you direct people's attention? So we can learn a lot about storytelling, not just in our own lives, but by looking at how others use storytelling.
So glad you brought that up, because there's a lot of people that say, it's just, I'm not a natural storyteller. And part of it is just starting to have more of a storytelling mindset. And throughout your day-to-day life, just be on the lookout, one, for how other people do it, and also things that you experience that you should put in your toolbox that you could bring up later to provide a great story. We have a few questions. Susan, Matt, you've always been a popular guy. Recently, with the success of your book and podcast, that popularity has skyrocketed. Oops, lost it. How are you dealing with all the attention?
Well, I don't think I have never been popular. I mean, I when I go back to high school, believe me, I think The topics that I cover, especially around spontaneous speaking, have really resonated for people. So I don't think it has anything to do with me. I think it has to do with the topic. I think people find these situations difficult. Small talk, apologizing, introducing ourselves, giving feedback. These are foundational challenges in this. So I think people are gravitating towards the topic. I love engaging with people and learning. I am fundamentally a curious person. So writing the book allowed me to talk to people that were just fascinating. I talked to a designer of Lego instruction manuals. I talked to a visual artist, if you've ever been in a meeting, who that does the image draws, and these are all fascinating ways. These are all people who have really insightful things to talk about in communication. So I don't know that I am more popular. I think the topic is one that's interesting, but the one thing that has changed for me is the ability to talk to more and more people about this, and I find it fascinating, and I see my job sort of as a translator of taking these other experiences and bringing them to people to help them. So I have benefited from the interest in this topic to allow me to do that more.
You demonstrated a lot of humility in that response.
Well, yeah, well, thank you. Popularity is something in high school I was very interested in, but since then I'm just curious about information.
Yeah, no, I love though how you said it's opened even more doors to
Absolutely,
have even more conversations and connections, and also this concept of you being a translator. One thing that I really appreciated about your book, which made it even richer, is that you bring in wisdom that you've garnered from so many other experts. So it's like this collective of thoughts from many, many experts, yourself included. We have a question from Deneen. You have given us great stories regarding structure, i.e. what, so what, now what. Can you add one more story in regards to structure?
Sure. So there are many structures that can be very useful to people. I have a structure that I really like for pitching ideas. We are often in circumstances where we have to very quickly communicate something we want people to be convinced of, persuaded of. So I work with a tremendous number of entrepreneurs. That's not surprising. I teach at Stanford's Business School. I'm in Silicon Valley. And I have a pitch structure I like that gives you a really effective idea of what the person is saying in a 30-second window. So this is truly the elevator pitch from floor 1 to floor 3. It's 4-sentence starters. What if you could, so that, for example, and that's not all. What if you could, so that, for example, and that's not all. So Carrie, let's do a little bit, if you're willing to indulge me, of spontaneous speaking here. Would you give me a product or service that you would like me to pitch in this structure? Now, make it a common one that I'll know about. But what's a product or service that I could pitch using this structure? And we have not coordinated on this at all. So this is
I'm looking at it right now. My desk treadmill.
Oh, excellent. What if you could get the exercise you need to be healthy and energetic without missing a beat of doing your work, so that you could be healthier and more effective in your everyday interaction? For example, imagine being on one of those daily update calls or stand-ups that you have, and you are actually using your desk treadmill to get your exercise. And that's not all. There's research that says when we are in movement, we are actually more creative and more concise. So you get that added benefit. So you see that by just answering these 4 sentences that I had a quick pitch. What if you could is engaging. It gets people's attention. So that is the relevance, and relevance is critical in any pitch. For example, grounds it in reality. So it's not vapor, it's reality. And that's not all, allows you to extend and expand and say what's possible in the future. I'm not saying this is a complete comprehensive pitch. I'm saying this is a 30-second elevator pitch that gets somebody interested in learning the longer pitch. So 4-sentence starters. What if you could, so that, for example, and that's not all.
Nicely done. I'd like our producer to drop the link to the desk treadmill because I have a feeling everybody's ready to make a purchase right now on the spot, and perhaps we can.
Maybe I should be a late night commercial host. We'll have to see. I don't know if that's the best use of my. I think I'd be very tired if I did that. In fact, if you will allow me, Carrie, I haven't. If I can do this, can I do this? I think so. I'm going to put in the chat a link to something I wrote on that structure, and maybe you can share that out with the broader community.
Great. All right. Take a look in chat and grab that. Oh, Matt, this has just been terrific. What have I neglected to ask you?
So the one thing we haven't talked about, Carrie, is the notion of concision, being clear and concise. Many of us, when we speak spontaneously, say more than we need to because we're thinking about it and we're crafting it in the moment. So being concise is critical. Attention is the most precious commodity we have in the world today. And I have to keep your attention. And to do that, I need to be very clear and concise. So how do we do that? One, we have to micro-focus on what's relevant and salient to the audience. We will pay, as an audience member, we will pay more attention to a communicator if we see value in what they're saying. So we have to make sure people see the value. By using structure, we get tighter. We also have to avoid jargon, acronyms, complex language, because that prevents people from understanding us clearly and from us being concise. I have two colleagues, Bob Sutton and Huggy Rao, who just released a new book. It's a great book on it's about friction in our lives and in our businesses. But they introduced this concept of jargon monoxide. And I love that term because it sucks the air out of the room and it causes your audience to disengage and pass out. We have to avoid that. So to be more concise and clear, we have to be very focused on what's relevant and salient. We have to leverage a structure. We have to be mindful of our language. My mother has this saying that I think is so valuable. Tell the time, don't build the clock. Many of us are clock builders when we communicate, especially spontaneously. Let's just tell the time. If somebody wants to know how the clock was built, they will ask us. That's the one area we hadn't talked about. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it. It's the final step of the methodology, and it is a critical one.
It is absolutely critical, and it takes practice, but it will pay dividends. Matt, this has been an absolute treat talking to you. I know our audience has benefited. We've got all kinds of wonderful feedback in chat. Given your extreme popularity, you probably have another engagement you need to race off to. So we will make sure we conclude on time. Thank you also to the audience. Your engagement has been just terrific. A reminder that this will be available in podcast form. And let's wrap up by giving a preview of what we'll be discussing during the April live event. We will be talking about how to effectively communicate in a crisis. Thank you again, audience. This has been wonderful.